Thank you, Radhika, for that wonderful introductory remarks. Thank you, Rohit, and thank you, Raghu, for joining us here. I know you've had a very busy day. Radhika told me that you've been on interviews from 7 in the morning. So thank you very much. At the end of a late day, you are in a hall full of people who are eagerly looking forward to this wonderful conversation. So I'll start with my first question. I've gone through the book in great detail. I think it's a fabulous book. I said that in my post too. The first question I have for you, and either of you could take it on, Rohit or Raghu, which is, in the introduction, you mentioned that India needs an irreverent, diverse, and argumentative society that will change the world. Is there any parallel country, small or big, in the last 100 years that has achieved growth with such culture markers?
Let me take the first stab at that. I think they have, but over a much longer period. I think if you look at the United States, one of the hallmarks of the United States is constantly reinventing itself.
True.
And if you remember, in the late 50s and early 60s, they felt they were falling behind the Soviet Union, the Sputnik moment, yeah. so to speak. In the 80s, it was Japan. We're falling behind Japan. In the 2010s, it was China. We're falling behind China. And every time it has caused them to re-examine what they're doing. And I think they've always been a little underconfident about their greatest strength, which is their inventiveness, their ability to attract a wide variety of people, the immigrant population, but that's not the only thing, and the extreme hard work that many in their country put in, constantly challenging the status quo. I think that is their true strength. It is the center of, it is the heart of capitalism, and it has served them very well. But they grew into this over a long period. What we have is the opportunity to follow that, but in a much shorter period. And that requires an enormous amount of work. That's the bad news. The good news is there are models around of how to do it. For example, one of the countries that is doing it right now is China. Not about the old style manufacturing-led growth, but new style, ideas-led. The amount they've invested in improving their universities, including getting back their diaspora to man those universities over the last 20 years, you can see the rate of their citations, is just taking off. They have created this new designed chip that they've produced right now is astonishing, the US, because they've sort of implemented things that they didn't think they could implement. The advantage we have over China is we are argumentative. We are still open to debate, to challenge. And if we can adopt some of what they're doing well with our framework, I think we can do better. We can be much more like America than China. To my mind, one of the biggest constraints on China today is they have the government for manufacturing-led growth, not the government for ideas-led growth. And that's where we have an advantage.
You want to add anything to that, Rohit?
Yeah, I think Raghu said it all. We had this graph that we eventually didn't put in the book that if you plot democracy index on the y-axis and kind of GDP growth on the x-axis, you see that basically the UK and the US are these slow crawling lines moving from the origin towards the northeast, right? They grow slowly and they give freedom to their people very slowly. I think we forget that the right to vote for the entire population came to these countries very late. India was remarkable, in that it just with a stroke of pen, it gave the universal adult franchise and never went back on it. And why we were remarkable is we were a consistent but poor democracy. And I think one can argue without taking a very strong moral view about it, was this good for growth? Couldn't we have done this manufacturing juggernaut with, if we were not a democracy and so on? And, and we can try to evaluate that with an impartial lens. However, given where we are today and the kind of path at least we are proposing in this book, um, what Raghu is suggesting is that we view this kind of scrawling line of the US and the UK and much part of Western Europe that can be condensed in the same way that East Asia condensed it in the first stage of development in the 20th century. Right? They condensed. You could have asked the East Asian countries, do you really think you can go from poor to middle income country in one generation? They did it. Right? So they were an outlier in that sense. What we are saying is that we can be an outlier in being a consistent democracy and yet growing and pulling ourselves into a middle income country while being irreverent, while being argumentative, and in fact, using these as our strengths rather than weaknesses.
Thank you on that. You make a case for English being an advantage for India. However, only 12 to 13% of Indians can read and write English. Is this enough? The Chinese and the Japanese have been successful in manufacturing and to a degree in manufacturing services without actually having that English advantage. So why do you believe India has that advantage?
Well, the Chinese are trying to learn English. They certainly have done a reasonable job at it, because partly that allows their students now to go to the US and benefit from the high quality universities and take back ideas. I think, certainly our students can do it. And, 13% are those who speak, really good English. There are a lot who understand English and who, with a little bit of training and education, can improve on it. One of the, I think, very interesting challenges that a country like Japan has is how do you provide consulting services when you speak only Japanese? You can't talk to the other side. We can. And so our sense is this is a foundation on which we can build. Even when you look at AI, over 60% of the matter on the internet is in English. And so if you're trying to train your AI, there's much more available in English than any other language. And that's a handicap that the Chinese have, because Chinese-based AI, there's much less material to train stuff on. So this is an advantage. Now, we can keep debating on whether, obviously we should know our mother tongue. Obviously, we should learn to read and write and be able to speak there. But let's also recognize we have this other language, which can be a window to the world. And therefore, can be a way that we essentially communicate in a way that, China can't, Korea cannot, Japan cannot. And that gives us a comparative advantage. So what are the areas where that will, help us? Exactly. And so I think this is an advantage. Yes, more people need to learn English, the less our politicians insist that all the teaching be done in the vernacular language while their own kids go to English medium schools. I think the more it will benefit the broader population. You can see that poor people are taking their children. One of the entrepreneurs we met who runs schools says, where do I find schools to buy? From the schools which are in the vernacular medium, because nobody's sending their kids to those schools. So we buy those schools, shift them to this new method, and then we have a ready-made demand for it from all the middle class people who want high quality education for their kids.
I think both the current number and the aspiration is important. We've gone from, Pramod is here, we've gone from, English was, centrally important in him being able to create a call center revolution in India, at the turn of the century. To, we have an anecdote in the book where Raghu is talking to one of his friends, and she's telling him that, we are now going to do front office work of our consulting and financial and management consulting work in India. And why is that? Is because, basically pandemic changed our notions of what is back office, what is front office in a very big way, what can be done from a distance. And I think English plays a huge role in enabling that. And I think we shouldn't shy away from it. One of the examples that I found amazing is there's a very prominent Dalit scholar and writer. If you haven't come across him, I highly recommend you to read him, Chandrabhan Prasadji. And Chandrabhan Prasadji often says that my two heroes are Macaulay and Adam Smith. Right? He says, stop giving me all this other gyan. These are the people who really helped many Dalit people, pull out of, in one generation. So there are plenty of examples like this, and we're not, and you're absolutely right that, we're at 13%, but the aspiration should be that we basically, most Indians are bilingual in some way or the other, is to make this bilingualism more sophisticated.
In every example, in every case in this book, you stress on quality over quantity, be it education, be it health, be it governance, every single thing. But unfortunately, India has always had a fascination for quantity over quality. So how do you think we should change this?
Well, we need both. Because we have 1.4 billion people, as we keep reiterating. So we need quantity. But having 1.4 billion trained at a very low level is not going to cut it. The world demands more and more quality as we go forward. How are you going to beat AI? How are you going to beat a robot? You beat it by having more capability that you add to the AI, and you beat it by adding to the robot. Person plus machine should beat machine alone or person alone. And for that, you need high quality people. So really the question that we ask in this book is, how do you, create quality at scale? And there are a lot of examples of how you can do that, right? Say, take healthcare. Right from the early days, we had a report which drove our ideas of healthcare. That was the Bure Committee report. And what that said is you should have 3 tiers. And that's a splendid design, because the lowest tier will do the basic triage, see, okay, what are your problems? I can't figure it out, I send it up. If I can figure it out, deal with it. So most of the problems are dealt at the lowest level. Next, go to the higher level, and next, go to the highest level, the tertiary care hospitals. 75 years after independence, we haven't implemented this pre-independence report in terms of the quantities of healthcare that we need at each level. But there are easy fixes. A lot of people go to unqualified medical practitioners. Who are these unqualified medical practitioners? Basically was a compounder, or was a nurse when the doctor was giving advice. They learned on the job. And now they've set up shops separately, and a lot of people trust them, they go. So can we improve the quality of this layer by giving them all a basic ability to recognize, here are 18 problems that you need to be able to fix, ranging from, a twisted, leg, septic wound, to, basic, cough, cold, and recognize when it's beyond the capacity and move it up. If you can train a lower level at this, just imagine how the quality of healthcare would improve. These don't need to be doctors. You just need to, and give them a certificate. Let them be able to show the certificate, but check that they know what is in that certificate. There are a whole bunch of examples in our book of places doing this, but each one is doing it independently. Can we do it in a much more systematized way so we improve the quality of healthcare at the bottom, right? Similarly, on education, everybody wants to send their kids to St. Columba's or to DPS RK-Puram. We both hail from DPS RK-Puram. It's the better school. But everybody wants to do that. It's very hard to create. I mean, DPS has franchised all over the place, but there's only one DPS RK-Puram. St. Columba's develops its capabilities over many years. Well, we talk about this entrepreneur in the book, Orchids, which basically is trying to systematize high-quality education. And what do? They do 30, 40,000 lesson plans. For each subject, there are so many lesson plans, which contain a video, here's what you say after that, here's the example you give, here's the problems that you offer, here's how you check it, everything. You have micromanaged every teacher. There's very little discretion allowed. Now, some teachers, I, for example, couldn't teach under such a system because I want discretion. I want to be able to, rant and rave as I want in class. But it improves the average quality significantly. And they keep tabs. Are the teachers delivering this? The students have a very high quality education. May not be 99th percentile, but is 95th percentile. With moderate quality teachers. That's about how we can scale quality. And we need to scale at that level if we are to touch the huge number of kids that we have coming out into high school. So those are examples which tell us there is a way, but you have to be appropriately willing to experiment.
It was natural, in the beginning that we would bank on quantity because quality was very hard to achieve. And I think one of the things, as you rightly point out, we are trying to emphasize in the book that we must be obsessed with quality. I think we are at a stage where the returns to being obsessed with quality will be seen in quantity. So there's actually very good research, recent research that has shown that for every one high-skilled job that you create in India, 4 to 5 other low-skilled jobs are produced along with the value added created by the high-skilled job. One example we give of in the book of entrepreneurs trying to kind of commercialize the art of Banarsi sarees, Tilfi, which we found very fascinating because of a couple of things they told us. The co-founders, Aditi Chand and Udit Khanna, they said it with a very strong belief. They said, whenever you think of Indian arts and handicrafts, you think of making, somehow there's an image of charity or you want to do good for someone who's doing work with their hands. And they said, this is just the wrong attitude. I want you to view my worker as an artist. And for that, we need to create a brand. Why is it that when you buy a bag of Louis Vuitton or something like that, you think of a certain price in your head, but not of Indian brands? And this is obsession with quality. One of the main problems is quality control. Can you ensure a quality by signaling it through a brand? And I think once you ensure quality, quantity will come directly or in many other ways. This is kind of one of the messages we're trying to give.
You make a very important point in the book saying we must move from being a society of authority to a society of justification, where senior leaders, whether it's government institutions, need to justify the actions that they are taking and why they're doing so. So what are the steps involved for anybody to move here, whether it's a private institution, which a number of people are here, or government, or countries? How do we move to a society of justification?
Well, we have been moving steadily, right? We do question a little more, but we also move backwards. Every leader at whatever level should be subject to questions. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? On what basis did you do this? The UK has a fantastic system of questionnaire, where the Prime Minister is subject to questioning. And it's available for everybody to see. And the Prime Minister has to give answers in Parliament, has to show up every questionnaire in Parliament, and sometimes has asked the most, sensitive or even rude questions. And it's basically saying that you are a citizen first, and you're not an emperor. And we have to adopt that to all our officials, right from the district collector up to the Prime Minister or the President. You are an official of the people, and the people have the right to ask you questions. And, part of it, I thought a great move was the Right to Information Bill, which Dr. Manmohan Singh brought in. I think that we need to examine its working, because it was sometimes used by activists to push a certain angle without necessarily subjecting the authorities to the right questioning. And then over time, the authorities developed certain sort of fallback positions. Or this we cannot disclose for this reason, that we cannot disclose for that reason. And then I think the process has become weakened over time. We need to look into our experience with that. How do we subject government departments to constant questioning about this and that without it being a way of vindictiveness, especially from people who feel that they were mistreated by the organization and so on. Also, I think we need to have these structures by which authorities, I mean, I remember as a finance ministry official going before the Parliamentary Committee on Finance and being subject to very rude questioning by people who were in the opposition, including Mr. Piyush Goyal and others. Now that Parliamentary Committee on Finance is led by one of the government's own MPs, which seems like a vitiation of the process that Parliamentary Committee should have been holding government to task. So we have these traditions. We shouldn't go back on these traditions. It was, I tell you, pretty tough being grilled by Ravi Shankar Prasad and Piyush Goyal, but that was the right thing in a democracy. When the UPA was in government, they were grilling it. When the BJP is in government, the opposition should be able to grill. But that requires a strengthening of the tradition.
I think that you're exactly right. By the way, that phrase is that we use was I think first used by Gautam Bhatia, a prominent legal writer who I recommend all of you guys to read. The justification. I think it's not an easy process, as you're rightly pointing out, as a polity and a society to transition to. But I think there's some easy fixes. One is just really ruthlessly emphasizing greater information and data. I think you have to make data available to people, right? That's where justification starts. Why did you do A? Why did you do B? And I think one of the things that, as a society, for instance, as a citizen, I would like to know is, if we just look at the pandemic that all of us lived through, right? Why is it that we did so poorly in the second wave? Many countries have instituted an inquiry into what happened, right? So if we were well prepared for the first wave, what happened? What were the signals given out? Why was our preparation so poor? At the same time, we are celebrating rightfully the fact that we did a pretty good job at vaccinating our people. There are lots of people in India, and the government did it on a war footing. And so I think there needs to be some justification for things that went wrong, and I think that can only happen when the correct data is made available to people. Were our death counts correct, for example? If that data is not correctly made available to people, it's very hard for the citizenry as a whole to ask for justification. So to institute a culture of justification, information, data dissemination, and broadly institutional checks which right to information provided for the citizens to be able to ask questions is very important.
Sometimes in the absence of data, you even fool yourself, right? One of the reasons why we were underprepared for the second wave was because we miscounted deaths in the first wave. We thought we had substantially fewer deaths than actually happened, and we thought Indians are immune to COVID, right? I mean, there was a lot of talk that India is a special case. We didn't correct for the fact we have a younger population, and we were totally unprepared for the fact that when it hit us the second time, it was virulent, but also, of course, we didn't count the deaths presumably as well in the second wave also. Most of the outside estimates are 10 times the estimates within India. But we are in danger of fooling ourselves a second time, which is, if you look at the economic survey, it says how wonderful our management of COVID was. Why we had so few deaths in the second wave was because we had this total lockdown on, which happened soon after the pandemic hit. So we are sort of making all sorts of judgments based on very poor data, which eventually lead to bad policy down the line. Next time there's a pandemic, we'll again have a total shutdown. Whether that was the right policy or not, we'll never know.
Stepping back, governments can no longer create jobs the way they did after World War II across the world. So in a very fast-changing world, how do you see the role of any government? What should government be focused on when things are changing almost every day?
Well, I think almost surely a couple of roles of government are to prepare everyone to have a fair chance in the economy. Some people will have a fair chance because they're already born into rich families and they get all the privileges that come with that. Some people need to be provided a fair chance because they are born in underprivileged communities, to underprivileged families, and essentially need to be given a little bit of support early on so that they can get the same kinds of access that others have. So that's one part. Create a level playing field when they become adults. It doesn't mean that constantly make sure everybody is the same, which is socialism, but at least ensure they get to that starting point pretty much as equal as possible. Otherwise, you get a very, you misuse your talent, you also get a very frustrated population, those who don't have a chance. The other thing to do is to also provide a clear framework as to how you can succeed, how you can create opportunities, how you can make yourself wealthy in this environment. That kind of framework, I mean, some of it is about protection of property rights, fair taxes, transparent policies, not ever-changing, tariffs and rules and regulations. All that is taken for granted there, but that's an important part of what government has to do. I think increasingly in the new era, I think some support to the process of intellectual property creation is also sometimes warranted, because sometimes that's an area with a huge amount of spillovers where government money appropriately induced can be a good thing. We were talking to a pharmaceuticals manufacturer in India, and we said, why are you continuously manufacturing generics? And this is one of the most, Yusuf Hamid of Cipla, one of the most advanced, and his contribution to the AIDS cocktail is very well known. But he said, look, I don't make the profits to make any kind of investment in they have a term for that, but let's say innovative drugs. He says in the US, it's the government, labs, and the universities which create those innovative drugs and then hand them over on a royalty basis to the pharmaceutical firms, which then essentially sell them around the world. Exactly. So how do you create that intellectual property? Maybe government has to play a role there also. Again, not so much in an interventionist mode, but in an enabling mode. It's past time we had a National Research Foundation. Now, how that National Research Foundation will give its grants is very important, is going to be critical. But the need for that is paramount, especially as we are entering competition in areas like intellectual property.
I think it's an important question. I think there is a poverty of language in the way government interacts with its citizens, and citizens absorb what the government can do for them. In the sense that, and you're seeing this play out in the recent state elections, and now also it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the general elections. So the way we think about this is that we have become a little bit of prisoners of our own instruments, and the instruments have sadly boiled down to broadly two. One is demand for greater reservations within government jobs, and the second is some kind of demand and supply of freebies. Okay, so you cannot limit government to these two things. In fact, you shouldn't limit government to these things, because going forward, given the number of people who are joining the labor force in India, the government cannot be the site of primary employment. It has to be the private sector. Okay, so when you ask what can the government do, right, it has to, I mean, either the impetus is going to come from civil society, media, intellectuals, as to kind of break this mold of poverty of language. Pratap, I don't know if he's here, he had this amazing piece a few days ago where he said the opposition literally has a problem of poverty of language, that they are not being able to communicate what is an alternative vision, what do they have, and he was basically arguing that the vote share is static in the recent elections. And I think the government should really actively be seen as a neighbor. The greatest success story of government, Raghu is being too humble to talk about it. If we have it in the, I forced him to put it in the book, is basically the India stack story. and and what we were able to build over it. There, and the government is an enabler. It's not and it's an amazing enabler. And one of the things that they did when he was at the RBI and Nandan was spearheading the thing was to make this decision that the financial instruments that are built on top of it should not be limited to banks. Today, 95% of all transactions happening are non-bank. I mean, so this is an amazing enabling framework, totally publicly sponsored, publicly owned. So what we would like, one of the things we suggest in the book is that we should be aspiring towards a similar health stack, right? India, the healthcare, the Bhore Committee stuff that we talked about, is so fragmented and it's such large loss of information. You buy a drug somewhere, you meet a doctor somewhere else. All this information is not connected. It is not used in a consolidated way. This would be a great initiative for a government to try to enable a health stack, for example, rather than trying to micromanage healthcare, which they may not be able to do, or which they aren't being able to do in a very effective way.
So in your book, you have mentioned a list of institutions like ID Foods, Tifli, Moglix, Lenskart, Cipla, Orchid Schools, the India Stack, Delhi Schools, the Mohalla Clinics, Irvine High Hospital, CMC Vellore, Agnikul, and Tejas as examples of what can be done in India, despite all that is there in India. What, in your opinion, are characteristics, something common between all these great examples that you picked out?
So I think the first thing to, sometimes the reaction to this book is, oh, you have all these, how will we possibly do it? Well, I think these examples are ways of saying that people are already doing it, except it's in different ways in smaller pockets. I mean, take Delhi government's Mohalla clinic and their, focus on schools. I mean, that's been a big change in Delhi. Why could Delhi do it and why aren't other people doing it? I think part of what we ascribe this to is Delhi is a small place. It's like a big village. I mean, it's much bigger than a village, but it's like a district in terms of size. And so it speaks to the power of decentralization, that when the power is decentralized, then the local government feels that if we actually improve the schools, we'll get the credit for it. And it will happen within the term that we have in office, because in 3 or 4 years, we can really clean up the schools, clean up the toilets, repaint the schools, make schools worth going to. We can cite Mohalla clinics where they actually come. And this can all be done. It doesn't have to take 20 years. It can be done in a few years, and we get credit for it. That was a innovation. Tilfi, which we talked about, this outfit, which is trying to sell Banarsi saris around the world. One of the important things they discovered was, why is it that the weaver just doesn't make any change? It's the same boring pattern year after year. Because they bear all the risk. If they can't sell, that's 3 months of labor which has gone down the drain. If they make a mistake, or again 3 months labor gone down the drain. You need somebody to take the risk from that weaver. And that's where Tilfi comes in. We will take the risk. You make the sari, and we will buy it, no questions asked. That allows the weaver now to take risk. That does 2 things. One, they can do more exciting patterns, new patterns, and Tilfi can provide them the designs to do that. Second, the Me Too, who used to imitate those patterns and do them on the machine much faster, they're now out of business because you're changing the pattern every time, you're making it much more attractive, and you have the Tilfi brand on it saying, this is really hand-woven Banarsi sari. So you're making a huge difference. I think each one of the entrepreneurs you look at, they're picking a problem, they're saying, we can solve it. And here's the innovative way. Now, obviously, we picked those who are on their way to success. Some of these, Lenscraft is a 5,000 crore company. So they have done a lot of, they've had success. But what again and again we heard was people who are unwilling to stay with the status quo. We can make a change, and we have to figure out how to. And in true entrepreneurial fashion, they tried again, and then they succeeded. And we need to instill that. And what is amazing is there are so many who are doing this in India. Now we have to enable them. And that's why I think with a little bit of help, especially in terms of the creation of intellectual property, we need to make a jump from Me Too products to new products. Somebody like Agnikul sending off 20, 30 feet rockets into space is one example of creating a new product. But we need far more of that. And there, I think, sort of focusing on research and development and enabling industry, government, and academia ties will, I think, help tremendously, making us an innovative, creative nation.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I would just classify them in two categories. One is sort of somewhat mission-driven. So CMC Vellore, I mean, amazing story. Arvind Eye Clinic. So I think there I would emphasize that people who are sort of driven by whatever it is their passions are, they're allowed to do what they want to do without much intervention. I think this is super important. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of people wanting to do things with a mission mode. And are they allowed to do those things to the best of their potential and capabilities? Whether it's entrepreneurship or medicine and so on. And second, I think, we cannot emphasize this enough, decentralized. The way we like to put it in the books is at the level of funds, functions, and functionaries, we need to devolve much more. I think, especially when it comes to health and education, Uttar Pradesh is the 5th largest country in the world. You cannot govern it from Lucknow. No matter how talented the IAS officers, no matter how talented the chief minister, whatever, you have to, to make, especially, because one of the things we're really emphasizing in part 2 of the book is to build the human capital of the country, which is really the biggest asset, but also something that is going to hold us back to achieving our potential. To do that, you must decentralize. And there is this, famous or infamous saying, right? Everybody in the system wants to decentralize up to their level. It's like mere tak ruk jao, like federalism is okay till the state capital, and so I think this is something we at least found in a lot of the stories that which we found attractive and interesting is to really follow this principle.
So my last question before I open it up to the audience is your 13th chapter, The Wrong Way, is actually a great chapter. What they've done is they've taken all the typical reader comments, classified that and said, okay, this is what you could ask as a reader. This is our response to it. Much like, okay, you can be the critic, and this is our view to it, opening up debate. What led you to actually write this chapter? I've never seen it in any book that I've read so far. It's a very unique approach, but I thought it was a fantastic approach.
Well, we had a really great exemplar for this. This is not our own idea. It was Mahatma Gandhi in Hind Swaraj. He basically asks the question as a eager reader, or in his, what did he call
Reader
them?
and editor.
Reader and editor. He was the editor, and we sort of took the idea from that. Actually, we wanted to write the whole book that way, and Radhika persuaded us very correctly that that was a silly idea. But we thought that, at the end, look, we didn't want to make this a criticism of where we are and where we're going. We wanted first, so a plan has to be beaten by a plan. You can't beat a plan with no plan. I think that is exactly what Pratap said a few days ago. And we first wanted to lay out the plan. What is the plan? And then we said, why is this better than the existing plan? Chapter 13 is the existing plan, some parts of it, not the economic side, but the social side. And we said, look, what is the problem with this? And why is it going to be detrimental to India going forward? And we were arguing with somebody who was firmly convinced that that was the right plan. Now, obviously, both words are from us, both the critic, both the questioner and the answer. And we just wanted to anticipate some of what would be argued. But I think that putting it there was the right place, because first we showed you what the vision was on this side, and then said, let's go up against the existing vision and say why there is a problem with the existing vision. I don't know if it'll, but hopefully we provided some data and some arguments.
Yeah, I took macro in graduate school with Thomas Sargent, who went on to win the Nobel Prize. So Tom, you always used to say, don't tell me why a model is wrong. It takes a model to beat a model. So if you want to critique a model, give me a model. And I really respect that view. And so Raghu and I debated, as he said, at the beginning, I was super excited about writing Hind Swaraj for the 21st century or something. We even had the title like that. And so we wanted the whole book to be like this, conversation, this argument. We had the material for it. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, Radhika knocked some sense into our head. The whole book cannot be like that. It'll lose the kind of punch, So we wrote that, and then we kind of debated, should it be at the front or at the end of the book? And as Raghu said, we decided eventually it should be at the end of the book because we first lay out our vision. And yeah, a lot of people are actually liking that chapter, so we're quite happy with it. Yeah.
So thank you very much. A big round of applause to both of them. Lots of hands up. Yes. First gentleman here.
Okay.
Okay, for starters, I'd like to humbly state that I'm from St. Columba's School. and in class 11, I went to DPS Archipuram for 4 days, and I came back to Columbus.
You made the wrong decision. But
Well, what I would like to read a book which is authored by an economist and an economist, so that we keep talking about GDP and valuations and growth mostly in financial terms. How does the popular narrative and a whole thinking process also includes environmental GDP, cultural GDP, and social GDP? So everything is actually interlinked and not working in silos. Yeah. I think till we don't have that, till you don't allow economists to sit on this platform, I think all this growth is eventually self-defeating.
Okay, look, I'll say that we're not preventing anybody from sitting on this platform. I don't see any barriers we are erecting. But you have a good point, which is that we need to think about growth in a holistic fashion. Now, obviously, some of what we were trying to say was where do we generate the GDP from? But you clearly make the point, which is very important, that for India, the environment is hugely important. And so there is a chapter in the book which talks about how we should change our views on the environment. What, right from the moment, the time of Dr. Manmohan Singh and even before we've been saying is, we promised never to reach your per capita level of emissions. And that certainly is the fair thing. You already are there. We won't, you shouldn't stop us. But increasingly, we should recognize that we are going to be facing the brunt of climate change in South Asia. We are one of the most exposed areas in the world. And so we cannot be a bystander on what is happening on the environment. We should be leading the charge. Not just our own, efforts, but other countries. We should be pushing them to make greater efforts because the fact is, this is sort of the first place environmental change is going to create havoc. We've already seen it happening in Pakistan. We see climate change already happening, affecting agriculture in India. It is going to get worse. So we cannot, take a back seat on this. We have to be leading the charge. And I think that we have the intellectual capital in India to add support to many of the developing countries and emerging markets that are trying to make the case. But again, we should be pushing the developed world to move faster than constantly focusing on just the fairness. Fairness is important, but if debate about fairness means no action, then it is going to hurt us much more. And so we need action also.
Somebody there? Yeah, please go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Bhalinder. I actually really honored to be part of the event. So, sir, actually the question is on the comment which you have just made on environment change and the climate change. So the entire world is seeing us. By 2030, we are positioning ourselves to be the third largest economy. In fact, yesterday only I was reading a news. I guess one of the cabinet ministers has said that by 2025 we'll be the third largest economy. I don't know how, but that was the comment made. And the Prime Minister is having a vision of making India the developed country by 2047. So what are the key short-term steps which the government as well as the private sector needs to take to make sure that at least climate change can reduce the impact, or at least not make us in a position that it still becomes a vision or a dream for us? So what are the things which we should do as a private sector or as well as the government sector, even anything? So
I'll let Raghu respond to that question. He knows much more about climate change, but just on the point of size of our economy, I think all of us here should have this mental exercise that every time we tell ourselves that we are the fifth largest economy or whatever, we do a number in our head about what our per capita GDP is and what is our ranking in terms of per capita GDP. Not that euphoria and optimism is not important. It is super important, both for investor sentiments and for the morale of the country. But what really matters is per capita GDP, and we should really keep this in mind. But I'll let you take the climate.
The other point is, I think sometimes politicians make these as aspirational statements. If you parse them, there's absolutely no chance we'll hit a 5 trillion economy by the end of 2025. That's 2 years from now. And we are at this point, 3.5, give or take, depending on where the exchange rate is, 3.5 trillion. That means we want to increase, do the math, right, by about 25% over 2 years. 12.5% GDP growth. Come on, smell the coffee. It's simply not possible from where we are. Will it be possible? Maybe. But the politicians also should be careful about making these statements. We're constantly saying we're going to be this and we're going to be that. Focus on the homework we need to do. Okay. Last point on climate change. I think one of the big concerns is, talk all you want about mitigation. We're going to blow through 2%, maybe even 3% by sometime this century. 3% additional warming since pre-industrial times. The kind of calamities that might happen in this country as a result, we don't know. But we should be prepared for it. It can be pretty disastrous. And so the first thing we need to think about is also adaptation. What do we need to change in our processes so that we become better adapted, right? We just saw floods in Chennai again. I mean, Chennai is like concrete paved over a lot so that we can't absorb the moisture that is coming. And so what is, once in a century downpour is going to become once every 3 years downpour. How do we adapt to that? Farming, Punjab is blessed with both rain-fed as well as river water. How do we make best use of it? Is rice farming still the best use? We need to move away from rice farming. What is the plan to do that? We need to put that in place. I mean, it'll also help the stubble that creates the smog in Delhi, but going to better crops is going to help nutrition, is going to help conservation of water. We can't be a water-short country and exporting rice. Doesn't make any sense. So these are the things we can do to adapt. We can adapt agriculture. We can go to more resistant, drought-resistant or water-resistant crops. But this requires planning on a big scale, and we need to do it sooner rather than later because it is going to hit us much more.
Professor, I'm Neeraj Chandra, and both of you have been talking about the change. And India has a huge base of youth and a massive workforce in rural India. We are seeing some changes, and that is in most of the elections are contested with loads of freebies by all the political organizations. Now, do you see this as a system of breaking the backbone of the youth or the workforce, or is it there's something progressiveness in this?
Well, I think targeted transfers can be a good thing if it helps the poorest invest more in nutrition, in schooling, in healthcare, etc., right? They can be a good thing. But mass transfers without targeting can be sheer populism. And that sort of undermines your ability to invest on the things that people really need, better schools, better healthcare, better roads, bridges, security, and those kinds of things. So, I mean, one of the upsides to the direct benefit transfer is it limits leakage. One of the downsides to direct benefit transfers is it's made it much more efficient to give these transfers and to put your photo on the transfer to say, this is my transfer. So everybody thinks they're getting it directly from that particular chief minister or prime minister. This is a direct gift. And that increases the popularity of that particular politician, and so you emphasize that much more. So we have to be careful about it. What's the right way? Can we define and ban freebies? I think it's very hard. As we joke, my giveaway is essential for people's development. Your giveaway is a freebie. That's how politicians define freebies. And so it's going to be very hard. What I think we can do is try and build more awareness in people that they need to spend more time thinking about the totality of promises that are made in elections. Maybe we need an independent body, like there are in many countries, to evaluate the promise to see how much it'll break the budget. And so somebody just promising the moon this way, that way, say this is what it'll mean for your public debt, for your ability to spend on other things. But we need to think about creative solutions to change the dialogue. But that said, some is okay, too much is problematic. It limits the ability of government to do more.
Hi, I'm Manu Kapoor. I always believe that data and intention...
Sorry, just 1 second.
I always believe that data and intentions are symbiotic to each other. And when you talk about growth, how can we precipitate growth when our qualitative and quantitative energies are not put into the right direction? This is one part of my question. The second part of my question is when we talk about 2047, which is a vision which it is 5 trillion or 7 trillion, but the thing is how prosperous we can be when we still do not have a right data of 3.5 trillion. So when we talk about growth and the way China and other countries are growing, with changing their model practically 100% for a new world, how can we create a new India order in the absence of data and intentions leading to a precipitated, defunct growth on a paper which is visible and which is substantiative of a fact that we can ask this question whether it's right or wrong?
So, see, this is a very important question in terms of defining policy, right? We already gave one example that if you count deaths wrong, then you will end up with the wrong policy of, for example, of managing the pandemic, right? So that's one example already in front of you. I think there are two issues here. One is the direct issue, which is just direct measurement. Are you measuring growth in the right way? Okay, and this is open to debate. People, Raghu's co-author and both of our co-author, Arvind Subramaniam, has written a lot about this. And I think it's a healthy debate, a debate that should be had. And I think the government should try to be as transparent as possible about how the indices are exactly being constructed and so on. I think beyond measurement, there is also an issue of interpretation, which I think is as important as direct measurement. So what do I mean by that, right? Like, so you can look at the public PLFS, right, Public Labor Force Survey, and interpret that unemployment figures in India are coming down, right, and become very happy about it, right? But there is a sense, I'm sure, in everybody in this room, that jobs ki halat theek thak nahi hai. It's not just the number, right? There is a deep. You travel, you see the coverage by various news organizations that took the pain of actually going to the people during the state elections. People after people, interview after interview, you see people worried about jobs. So when you're reporting this direct measurement, assuming that it's correct, like let's take it, even though there is disagreement between, let's say, CMIE and PLFS on what exactly is the unemployment number, how do you interpret the number is very important, right? Let's look at the look at the employment data. India, anecdotally speaking, and from our own experience of interpreting this data, has a deep crisis of disguised unemployment. What does that mean? If two people are sufficient to till a field and 6 people are working on it, that is a massive loss of productivity that is not getting counted in this measurement. Right? You might still look at the jobs ki situation theek hai, but in reality, what really matters is productivity per person. You go to a Starbucks and there's 7 people standing behind the counter where 2 will be sufficient to do the job that is being done. This is disguised unemployment. Right? So I'm just trying to differentiate direct measurement from interpretation. I think both of them need an honest, careful thinking. And I think along these lines, we should seriously start thinking about institutional independence. Raghu worked at the RBI, he can speak more about it. Some of the data collection institutions need autonomy. They should not be sensitive to who is in government. You cannot suppress consumption data just because it is showing you that consumption has gone down. I think we should be celebrating that India's GDP numbers have come out well, but if you look at private investment and private consumption, it is low. Right? So consumption is not picking up, but we don't have actually good consumption data. So I think intention is very important, but you cannot leave, as citizens, we cannot leave data collections to the intention of the government of the day. There needs to be institutional arrangement that safeguard data collection from who is in power at that time.
Last question. You had a question? Yeah, please go ahead. This is the last question for the day, ladies and gentlemen.
Pramod, we give that to you here.
Thank you very much. Good to have you here, Raghu. Good to have you here, Rohit. It's a pleasure. Welcome to Gurgaon, by the way, because this is our home for many of us. Delhi is a suburb of Gurgaon. Delhi will recognize that one of these days, and that's how we treat it. And so it's a joy to have you here. Couple of questions, or one overall question. Bureaucracy remains a nightmare. The control that they have and the power that is exercised by the way of bureaucracy remains extremely difficult and has a huge impact on ease of doing business. So while we will grow at 6.5 or 7%, whatever the GDP rate that we come out with at this point in time, we could easily surpass that by a percentage point or 2 percentage points if we were able to unclog the systems that we have, etc. My question is more open-ended to you both. How should we do that? How should we think about it? And what will it take to really get rid of this stranglehold that a lot of the bureaucracy, perhaps there are bureaucrats here who are going to kill me later on, but how do we get away from that? Because no country, and we also work in an atmosphere of distrust. The default answer, if I may refer to your alma mater, RBI, the default answer is fill a form, fill 20 forms. But no economy can survive that way. No economy can survive without trust, without a contract between people of understanding. Would love your thoughts on that. I know it's very open-ended, but would love your thoughts.
Look, this has been an old problem, right? And we need to keep tackling it. And we need to find new ways to tackle it because the old ways run out of steam at some point. This is not in the book, but I was once told by a bureaucrat about the sting of the scorpion, which is you deal with a reform, you make it really quite liberal, you open up everything, and that's when the bureaucrat who's in charge has this wonderful idea how to negate everything with one subclause number 45, rule number 33, which completely vitiates the whole reform. That's the bureaucrat complaining. And we go back to square one. And again, what you see is you have to constantly hit your head against that and keep saying, no, don't put this in, take it out. And you need a little bit of risk tolerance on the bureaucracy. I mean, there are some very good bureaucrats who want to move towards that, but it also requires some risk tolerance so that you will not be blamed for what happens down the line in case something bad happens. Why not cover your backside and make sure nothing happens? Because you're not blamed for nothing happening, but you're blamed for something bad happening. That's a constant. I think one possibility that we suggest, I mean, look, that's an issue which we don't tackle head on, but one possibility we suggest in the book is decentralization. When you have competition between the states, which are trying, and the center doesn't control who gets to do what, then you have states sort of competing for investment and making it easier for certain businesses, and then others can look at that. Did they do reasonably well, or did they attract the wrong kind of investment? And they can also point to that as a precedent. Those guys did it, so I did it. It gives you some bureaucratic cover, right? So I think we need much more competition, not just at the state level, but at the district level. We give the example of China, where a lot of powers were decentralized to the local level. And those officials, it was in their benefit to make the right changes for their favored candidates because they were evaluated on growth. And so once that happened, they eased the bureaucratic path. No problem was a problem. I think now, unfortunately, with the centralization under Xi, they're backing off from that. But we should try it. Maybe it will create the right kind of mix between bureaucratic conservatism, but competition between sort of jurisdictions to generate the kind of new ideas that will generate growth. So certainly worth trying.
So thank you, Rohit. Thank you, Raghu, for an outstanding 1 hour. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for both of us.